we undertake several major programs. They include the Global Taiwan Brief, which is a bi-weekly publication featuring timely analysis about Taiwan. If you're an analyst, journalist, an academic interested in contributing to the publication, please contact us. We're looking for you. Second major program is a public seminars, where we invite leading experts to tackle timely issues about Taiwan. Third program is our annual symposium, which is our flagship event on US-Taiwan relations, held every fall featuring key policymakers from Taiwan and the United States. We also offer fellowship opportunities for American researchers to go to Taiwan, conduct short-term field research, as well as researchers from Taiwan to come here to Washington, D.C. for a brief field study. We also issue occasional reports where we do in-depth research studies written by staff as well as our scholarship recipients. Last but not least, we also conduct cultural activities with movie nights and other cultural programs throughout the year. If you're not already subscribed to receive our updates directly in your email inbox, you may do so free of charge on our website at www.globaltaiwan.org. Before we begin, I want to take this moment to thank GTI's co-founders, our board of directors, and advisors, many of whom are in this room today. And of course, my hardworking colleagues, Marcia, David, Jonathan, and Catherine, as well as our interns, Jack and Vicky. So let's begin today's panel discussion on Taiwan in 2019. 2019 will be a pivotal year for Taiwan, for US-Taiwan relations and cross-strait relations for many reasons. After the recently held 9-1 elections, which saw the political resurrection of the opposition party, Taiwan is already preparing for general elections, which are scheduled to be held in January 2020, only 1 year away. The 2020 elections, in which Taiwan's citizens will elect the president as well as members of the National Legislative Yuan, will have implications for Taiwan's foreign, defense, and economic policies, and thus implications for U.S. interests. 3 weeks in, and 2019 is already shaping up to be a very eventful year. President Tsai Ing-wen issued her administration's first New Year's speech, which was quickly followed by President Xi Jinping's 40th anniversary speech commemorating the 1979 message to Taiwan Compatriots, which was also followed by a very forceful response from President Tsai. Xi's message to the Taiwan Compatriots should not be seen in isolation, as it is also taking place against the backdrop of China's intensifying pressure campaign against Taiwan that is utilizing diplomatic, military, and economic measures over the past 3 years. Not only has the PLA clearly stepped up military exercises encircling Taiwan, while there was a brief pause in the public exercises directed before the November elections, the frequency of the military exercises immediately picked back up after the November elections. But also China has turned many of Taiwan's diplomatic allies and engaged in a number of other covert measures to subvert Taiwan's democracy. While cross-strait relations remain in a state of cold peace, there have been steady improvements in US-Taiwan relations, particularly in the security and political realm, with strong provisions included within the National Defense Authorization Act, the passage of the Taiwan Travel Act, and also the recently signed Asia Reassurance Initiative Act. There are also important milestones in the US-Taiwan relationship this year, such as the 40th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, which has defined and has also evolved with Taiwan over time to shape the relationship between the United States and Taiwan. Highlighting Taiwan's evolution, as well as the evolution of the US-Taiwan relationship in a major policy speech, US Vice President Mike Pence, while condemning PRC's actions of stealing Taiwan's diplomatic allies in Latin America, he stated unequivocally, "America will always believe Taiwan's embrace of democracy shows a better path for all the Chinese people." End quote. Members of Congress are now sounding the need to recalibrate U.S. policy towards Taiwan to better reflect 21st century realities, with a thriving democracy on the one side and an increasingly repressive, authoritarian regime on the other. Now, we are very delighted to be able to organize today's expert panel discussion to help us better understand precisely what those realities are, and also to offer their assessments of what to expect for Taiwan, cross-strait relations, and US-Taiwan relations in 2019. You have their full bio, so I won't go into details. To my immediate left, we have David Brown, who is the China Studies visiting scholar at the School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington, D.C. Before joining SAIS, he served over 30 years as a Foreign Service Officer in the U.S. State Department. To his left, we have Philip Saunders, who is the Director of the Center for the Study of Chinese Military Affairs and Distinguished Research Fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies since 2004 at the National Defense University. To his left, we have Rupert Hammond Chambers, who is the President of the US-Taiwan Business Council, who's been there since as the President from 2000. Finally, we have Vincent Chow, who is the Director of the Political Division at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative's Office, and who most recently served as Chief of Staff to the current Minister of Foreign Affairs. He just came here fresh from Taipei, so we're really looking forward to his comments and his observations about what to expect in 2019. The format of our discussion today will begin with opening statements from each of the expert panelists with a focus area that we've discussed prior. And then it will be followed by a moderated discussion. Then for the last 15 minutes, we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So to begin, Dave, I'd like to start with you. And so the floor is yours.
Okay, Russell, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me with this great panel. Looking out at this room, crowded as it is, I think it's a tribute to the quality of programs that the Institute has been organizing in recent years, which you can track. And I'm delighted that you've got it set up now so that you can broadcast this to a larger audience, which really is a step forward in your work. I'd like to do three quick things. One, to talk a little bit about the sort of macro framework around Taiwan in 2019. And secondly, to look at more detail on the agenda or calendar for domestic politics in Taiwan in 2019 and the calendar for cross-strait relations in 2019. Now, what I'm going to say about the macro environment is something everyone's aware of, and that is the triangular relations between Taipei, Washington, and China are in a period of considerable tension and instability. Foremost in that is the US-China confrontation over trade and tariff and technology issues that is supposed to come to a head to a certain extent by the end of March this year. I think it is going to continue for much longer than that. It's only one part of a very tense relations, which are as bad as they have ever been. In China, Xi Jinping is facing a very significant slowdown of the Chinese economy. And that is creating problems for him and contributing, I think, to the way the trade tensions are working out. In the United States, you now have a much more serious confrontation between a Republican president and a Democratic Congress than you've had before, visualized in the shutdown of government which is going on. So there's a considerable amount of instability all around Taiwan's place in international affairs. In that context, if you look at cross-strait relations themselves, they are in a relatively stable condition. Since Xi is focused on things domestically and on the economy, cross-strait relations are not an urgent issue for him in 2019. And I would say the same is true for President Tsai. Her priorities are to get renominated and then to campaign and win re-election. And in my view, that task requires her to continue avoiding confrontation with the PRC and to continue trying her best to maintain the status quo, because that will be the platform on which she wants to run. So in that context, I think cross-strait relations are in 2019, not for the future necessarily, but for 2019 in a relatively stable condition. And I would add on that, that despite the fact that the PRC constantly tells everyone that Taiwan is the most important issue in US-China relations, if you look at the meetings that take place between our leaders, Taiwan is in fact way down, almost sort of, I've got to mention it at the end of the meeting so the Americans don't forget. It's way down on the agenda. And that is, I would say, another indication that 2019 is going to be a relatively calm period in cross-strait relations. Okay, turning to the domestic situation in Taiwan. Obviously, this is a year of preparation for and campaigning for the 2020 elections. Barely a year away. The immediate next step are by-elections for 5 places in the legislative yuan. The first one is next week, and following that in March. And then each of the parties has to get themselves organized. The DPP has taken 2 important steps, I think, to getting ready for the campaign. And first is to elect a new chairman, a very credible person to lead the party. And the second is to have a relatively smooth transition between Premier Lai leaving and Premier Su taking office. I was personally struck by a number of things that Lai Ching-te said at the handover ceremony. 2 of them that I will mention are his comment that in facing the pressure from China, what Taiwan needs more than anything else is unity. And then he went on to voice, in his own words, some of the ideas that President Tsai had been using recently for her own comments on cross-strait relations. That was an encouraging sign to me that there will not be a big problem of disunity within the DPP. Nevertheless, the party has to go through a process that will start sometime probably after March to have a primary to choose the candidate. There are possibilities that other people may want to run against Tsai, and that we just have to watch that work through. And once that nomination process is over, the party has to go in through the process of choosing all of its candidates for the legislative yuan elections, and that will take place in the summer, and then there'll be a big kickoff event, party congress of some kind, to launch the campaign. And so that's what's ahead for the DPP. And the KMT also, I mean, they come off of the local elections feeling rather positive about the future, but the reality is that they too have a nominating process they have to go through, and that is likely to be contentious. Contentious because the party itself is divided, and they haven't agreed on the rules of how that nominating process will go. So I suspect that is going to be a period of some difficulty. Current chairman, Wu Guanyi, is not the only person interested in the job, and some people have hinted of an interest of running, others have formally said they will run, and so that's going to be a complicated process. Part of that process also, I think we have to watch here in the United States, is who is going to come and visit Washington in this period, because it's typically the role of people who are seriously interested in running to come to Washington and demonstrate that they have good, solid relations. So who's coming? It looks like Eric Chu is going to likely come fairly soon after Chinese New Year. Ke Wen-je is talking about coming later, and he's going to be a very important figure this year. If, on the one hand, he denies that he's interested in running. On the other hand, the public opinion polls say he can beat either the KMT or the DPP candidate. So he's going to play an important role this year, whether he runs or not, because if he doesn't run, he's still going to be dragged into questions of who does he support amongst the people who are running. So he's watching who comes to Washington. Interestingly, there's nothing I have heard about Wu Guanyi wanting to come to Washington. He did not come last year. There was discussion of his coming even earlier than that, and there's no talk of his coming now. Quite frankly, I think it's important for the KMP leaders to come here. I'll just leave it at that. I think I've used up my time. There are other things I could say, some of which you said, so I'm going to stop here.
We can pick it up in the discussion. Bill, over to you.
All right. My pleasure. I have to start by saying these are my own personal views, not of the government, the Department of Defense, National Defense University. So that's out of the way. I'll spend my time talking more on the military side, and I'm going to focus mainly on the PRC, the mainland side of that, and what the PLA is doing. But I'll talk a little bit about the Taiwan side and maybe come back in on some of David's points at the end. The big thing going on in the PLA is a major military reform that has basically completely reorganized the way the PLA works, turning it from an army-dominated system to a military that looks like it's starting to be serious about conducting joint operations. And if you want to read about that, we'll have a book coming out in February that goes into this in great detail. But I'll just get the bottom line on it. It's an impressive set of reforms. Before the reforms, the PLA had a number of structural obstacles that would have made it very hard to conduct a major military operation like an invasion of Taiwan. My judgment is that these reforms have largely fixed that structural problem and provide the possibility of a significant increase in military capabilities, including in the capability to invade Taiwan. Still a very risky, difficult operation, but they've removed one major impediment. And a lot of what is going on in the PLA now is getting used to this new organizational structure, which now for the first time has joint theater commands that are really joint. Where you've got somebody in charge and they can control the Army, they can control the Navy, they can control the Air Force, they can control the conventional side of the 2nd Artillery. They're getting support on space and cyber and on logistics. This is a whole new structure and potentially a much more effective one. And I think what we've seen over the last 2 years has been sort of, okay, now here's the new parts are in place. How do they work together? How do we practice? How do we train? How do we start to try to figure out how to make this work? And I think we are seeing that. We're seeing exercises that are more joint in nature. It's not just an airplane flying over the Army and you call it joint. It's the services really trying to figure out how to work together. And they're focused on their contingency plans. And for the Eastern Theater Command, the big contingency plan is Taiwan. So they're doing more joint training, more realistic training, and figuring out how to make this system work. In the near term, it is a disruptive process, not least because they downsized by 300,000 people in the middle of it. But over the longer term, I think there's the potential here for a significant improvement in combat capability to do high-end operations, and that's got to be a big concern for Taiwan. What we're seeing in the near term, as Russell mentioned, is military exercises on the one hand to build capability and figure out how does this work, but some of the things are training and signaling exercises. And you mentioned that right before the election, some of this circumnavigating of Taiwan by ships and aircraft stopped. Now it's picked up again. One of the interesting things, talk to people in Beijing, and yes, indeed, that is something the Taiwan Affairs Office can do. They can talk to the military and say this is not the time for an exercise right before the elections, or presumably it would be a really good time for an exercise. So that's been one of the mysteries in this field, how that connection works. But we see it empirically that it does work, and I'm told on the ground that it does work. That said, thus far, these have been signaling. They're not a serious effort to prep for an invasion. They're intended as part of a broader pressure campaign against Taiwan, against President Tsai, and don't seem to me likely to either escalate by accident or by purpose in the near term. And I think that's one thing that Xi Jinping has been very clear about, that he wants to avoid a crisis. and he wants to have the tools to manage a crisis, both with the U.S. It's unfortunate in the current state of cross-strait relations. Some of the possibilities there are not being taken advantage of. So I'm worried about these improvements over the medium to long term. I'm not worried very much in the next year. If we look on the Taiwan side, I think one really good thing happening on the military security side is a focus on what it would take to defeat an invasion. What are the types of capabilities that Taiwan military needs? I think they have invested in planning for this, some investments in acquisition of particular capabilities, and we're starting to see it reflected in the training. So training for specific kinds of capabilities you would need to resist a PLA invasion, and that's a very good thing. That is something I think the Taiwan military should be focused on. I think more broadly, there are challenges that Taiwan faces. One of them is the focus on things that are useful for counter-invasion, but aren't necessarily the sexiest capabilities, with the need of the services or the desire of the services for platforms, for modern aircraft, for modern destroyers, for submarines. The Army wants a tank. And that tension between how you spend your limited procurement dollars, are you focused on the invasion stuff, even if there's not a service constituency for it, or are you meeting the service desire for to modernize platforms? That's a difficult thing to do. Recruitment has been an issue. I think there's some modest improvements in that in most recent data. That's a good thing. The push on domestic production for some weapon systems, including submarines, that's always a challenge, because to build it yourself always seems to take longer than you thought it would and cost more than it was supposed to. But Taiwan is pushing ahead with that in a couple areas. We hope both that'll go well in terms of capabilities, but also in broader support for defense spending. I think it's clear that's one of Tsai Ing-wen's goals in doing this, is to have some of the work happening in Taiwan and broaden the constituency for defense spending. And there I would note that there has been a modest increase in defense spending. That's good. That's good. It would be nice if it was a bigger increase in defense spending, in my view. So that's on the Taiwan side. And I'll just kind of try to complement what David said. You know, if we look at the triangular framework, I agree with him that it's stable so long as people don't do stupid things. And so that's something to think about, that you know, politicians are capable of doing stupid things. Really? But at the moment, I don't see incentives in Beijing or in Taipei or in Washington to push the envelope in ways that would really be destabilizing. So I tend to agree with, despite all that's going on in US-China relations, your message of stability is there, and that's how I read Xi Jinping's speech as well. It's disappointing in some ways, but it's a status quo speech. It's not got a timeline. It's not reflecting urgency on this issue. He has much bigger problems to deal with in the near term. And why don't I stop there and save time?
Okay, sounds good. Rupert, over to you.
Okay. I just quickly, on the point that Dave made right at the end, I would encourage all of you, and I certainly something the US TVC pursues, which is engaging the KMT. I think that persuading and engaging and warming down that a strong US-Taiwan relationship is a priority, is an enormously important thing to do, and I'm looking forward to seeing Eric Chu here, among others, potentially as the year progresses. I've been asked to talk a wee bit about the economic relationship, so please try and stay away. How do you balance in an election year economic populism over sound macroeconomic reform? Gosh, we've struggled a lot with Taiwan on sound macroeconomic reform. The last really significant period of macroeconomic reform accompanied Taiwan's accession to the WTO in the early part of the 2000s. Since that point in time, Taiwan, the only other real area or effort, I think, for economic expansion took place within our government's engagement with China through ECFA, and the view that if we expand the China market, then potentially we can accelerate growth. but Taiwan sort of bumps along candidly between 2 and 3% in a good year, and between 1.5 and 2.5% normally. And frankly, it's capable of growing far faster. Growth in 19, the consensus view is low 2%. You'll all have seen the Apple headlines. That's important. Taiwan's companies are the primary systems integrators and suppliers for Apple's supply chain. When Apple goes down, Taiwan's economy has a material impact on Taiwan's economy. That said, there are areas in the global economy that are expanding, the server area, for example, but Taiwan also has a high exposure. So you're going to get some uplift there. But I think overall, we're going to see much the same. The macroeconomic picture is going to remain much the same. And I suspect from an EY-LY standpoint, from a priority standpoint, we're going to see a lean more to economic populism over harder macroeconomic reform, unless, of course, there is the potential for a significant breakthrough in Taiwan's external trade relations. So let's talk a wee bit about that for a couple of minutes. At the moment, when US trade policy to Taiwan is extremely frustrating, as it has been for years. Obviously, we have the legacy issues surrounding pork, beef, agriculture generally. USTR has returned to a policy of withholding the TIFA as a means to apply pressure. Frankly, I'm not sure how much pressure is being applied by TIFA. It is a modest, and that is a kind word to use, platform for engagement between two highly significant bilateral trade relationships, and both deserve a far more significant platform for engagement, trade liberalization, and a mechanism for sorting out issues. But nevertheless, we're stuck again, or remain stuck, excuse me. TIFA is not going to happen. TIFA is not going to happen. Then just leave it at that. And then, of course, we have Mr. Trump's trade policies. And Taiwan has been caught up a wee bit in that. A good illustration of it would be Taiwan as a procurer of steel, for example. It's turned into finished goods in Taiwan and then exported on to markets, the United States, obviously, and the issues that the Trump administration have with that. That is an example more broadly of Taiwan's position and its interdependence and engagement with China within the supply chain, and how USTR and the economic leadership for Mr. Trump view countries, economies that are appropriately situated in that supply chain, and how they might then incur the wrath of the United States' present trade policies and the use of trade law to attempt to reconstitute that landscape. Taiwan remains outside of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's a mouthful. Which has been launched and certified by Brunei, Malaysia, Chile, and Peru. Taiwan obviously has been extremely clear that it would like to join that, but it can't get out of its own way. I'll come back to that in a minute. And in fact, there's an important meeting in Tokyo this weekend on the CPTPP, and one of the issues that will be discussed will be the rules for expansion. What rules will be put in place to assess which countries/economies will be considered for expansion of what is now already an important global trade agreement. Taiwan obviously has an extremely important and pressing interest in becoming a member. But let's get back to it. It can't get out of its own way. The referendum on Japan food imports in November was a huge own goal, to use a soccer analogy. If I were the National Security Bureau, I would be all over that. If there's a single instance of Chinese meddling in Taiwan's elections, I would want to look right at that, because the real winner on that, as far as I'm concerned, is China. Because it so fundamentally undermines the ability of Taiwan to create a better relationship with the Japanese, the possibility for a bilateral agreement, which would then flip into a broader discussion about Taiwan inclusion in CPTPP, which of course the PRC opposes. So that referendum obviously was and remains a significant burr in the shoe of Taiwan-Japan relations and Taiwan's interests more broadly in inclusion in this important trade agreement. No real sign that that's going to get sorted anytime soon, regrettably. Former Premier Lai was quite chatty at the beginning of this week, and perhaps some of you read about it. He made a point to publicly apologize for his approach as a legislator, a member of the UN, for his approach on pork and beef, stating that the politicization of the issue domestically has changed Taiwan's broader interests, has impacted Taiwan's strategic interests. And if you excuse me, I'm going to quote directly what he said. This is on Monday, so literally a day or two after he stopped being premier. There's no escaping my own complicity as a legislator at that time, and I must apologize to the public. Now I can say solemnly and sincerely that all parties must strive for a political culture that holds the good of the nation above all, that the strategic interests of Taiwan are more important than the parochial interests of a small group. Society should adopt, and I'm back to quoting him, society should adopt international standards and engage in international trade if we are to have the opportunity to join in regional economic integration and avoid taking Taiwan down a path of ever greater difficulty. Lai said, and he was directly citing US pork and beef ban as an example. Taiwan's self-marginalization as a consequence of domestic political parochial interests. It's a problem. But Taiwan domestic politics aren't the only reason we are stuck. USTR's refusal to entertain other strategies in an effort to break the barrier between moving on to greater things is also a real problem. No one is arguing that pork and beef and agricultural issues should not be dealt with, but we are 10 years into a strategy that USTR is pursuing that has manifestly failed. And it is hurting us, our own self-interest, and it is hurting Taiwan, it is hurting the relationship. And we have a vested interest in the economic health and well-being of Taiwan. For if it is economically marginalized, it becomes obviously more vulnerable. And guess who capitalizes on that? And that is not in our interest. The bigger picture is, of course, PRC coercion. As the TRA notes, and I quote, to maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion, right? So China's use of economic coercion through its carrot and stick approach to Taiwan, coupled with its rampant abuse of IP and trade secrets violations, should trigger the TRA. The broader argument is that a full bilateral agreement with Taiwan is in the parochial interests of the United States and Taiwan, manufacturers, service providers, and of course the peoples of both countries. It would provide a platform to resolve outstanding agricultural matters, which would in turn open the door to Japan and by extension CPTPP, the EU and others. It has a domino effect. And just to wrap up, so much of Taiwan's economic fortunes are a matter of domestic political will, in my view. Not all, but many. If the PRC is an existential threat, and I believe that, to Taiwan, what is Taiwan prepared to do about it? What is it prepared to do about it? The US should act in its own interest, which is the pursuit of a bilateral trade agreement. I believe that. With Taiwan, however, the path of least resistance is a Taiwan that is able to fully comprehend its long-term strategic interests, as former Premier Lai notes, over the short-term needs of a domestic political constituency. That is what I hope for in 2019. I recognize that it is a steep climb in a political year, but if we really are in a new era of tension and threat and coercion from the PRC with the highest stakes, then surely that is incumbent on the leadership of Taiwan, as well as the United States, to take that in consideration when they look at trade and economic matters. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rupert. And last but not least, Vincent, we've got these assessments from Washington about what's happening in Taiwan and cross-strait relations. I just want to thank you again for accepting our invitation to come here and speak. It's wonderful to have your perspectives, included in our discussion, because I think it's so important that when we're talking about Taiwan that we get also a perspective from Taipei, and I can't think of a better person to do that than yourself at this point. So, Vincent, over to you.
Well, Russell, the only disappointment I have at GTI is that you put me after Rupert. Did such a great job. It's actually pretty difficult to follow. But anyways, I digress. And I could not be happier to be here at the Global Taiwan Institute and more generally in Washington, D.C. So thank you, Russell, for inviting me. And it's been a long time since our meeting yesterday, if you count in all the hours that I put in actually writing these remarks up. And it's also great to see Rupert, who I actually see all the time in Taipei, and I see him so often I have long suspected he has a second job somewhere in Taiwan. And it's a great honor to see Dr. Brown on this here called Respected Scholars on Taiwan, China, and defense issues. And I look forward to working with all of you in the years ahead. So I think I'm quite fortunate in arriving here in Washington, D.C. at just the right time. We had our first major snowfall, I believe, of this season, which was interesting because when I was coming out of the airport, just a couple of weeks ago, I thought I landed somewhere in Florida. We have the government shutdown, of course, or should I say a lapse in federal funding, which has made traffic great over the past 2 weeks. And of course, we have the US-China trade talks, which will have wider repercussions for both here and across the rest of the world. But of course, today we're here to talk about Taiwan in the year ahead. And as Russell rightfully pointed out, it's going to be a big year for Taiwan, both in terms of our own upcoming elections and more generally when we look at the regional environment, our relations with the international community, and the commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act. So I want to begin by saying this. One thing we can all be sure of in the year ahead is that Taiwan will remain committed to being a firm and reliable partner for the international community. Now, part of what this means is that this administration will continue to pursue a whole-of-government approach to maintaining peace and stability in the cross-strait relationship. As President Tsai recently pointed out, in response to some remarks that came from the other side, she will continue to seek a healthy dialogue and exchanges with China while holding her ground on the principles that matter most to the Taiwanese people. Now, this includes equality, as well as respect for Taiwan's democratic institutions. It also includes pragmatism, especially concerning the issues that have a direct impact on the livelihoods of people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So I'm talking about issues like the recent swine fever outbreak. Now, what being a firm and reliable partner also means is forging ahead on building strong partnerships with like-minded countries from around the world. So over the past social and economic achievements on their own right, separate from just the lens of the cross-strait relationship. We see new and thriving partnerships with the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, India, as well as countries in Europe and in Southeast Asia. Countries that I think that people wouldn't have an immediate inclination to, just a few years ago. But what we've seen over the past few years is enormous leaps and bounds in our relationship with these countries. Now, these partnerships with these countries range from the digital economy to investment, from education to women's empowerment, and from rural health to combating transnational crime. So they highlight Taiwan's ability to be a very real contributor to pressing issues from around the world. And I can give a couple examples of this. First, we've set up more scholarships than ever before for students from our diplomatic allies, as well as India and Southeast Asia. We want the best and the brightest to study in Taiwan and become Taiwan's bridges back to their home countries. And second, we're holding more workshops under the Global Cooperation Training Framework, GCTF, which is really a handful and difficult acronym, but we're holding more workshops than ever before so that Taiwan and the United States can work together to help address global issues, ranging from health to media literacy. Number three, we're enhancing our work with like-minded partners within our diplomatic allies so that we can leverage our respective strengths and opportunities to further our development work there. So we do all this because we think it's not only important for Taiwan to maintain peace and stability in our own surrounding waters, including, of course, the Taiwan Strait, but also to be an active contributor to issues that matter most in the region and across the world. And we think it enhances rather than diminishes Taiwan when we showcase our strengths, our capabilities, and our willingness to act around the world. And so you can expect to see a lot more of that going into 2019. Now, I want to also emphasize, given that we're here in Washington, what being a firm and reliable partner means in the context of our relationship with the United States. So, as all of us know, this year we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the enactment of the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA. And I think if you look back 40 years ago, you'll find that aside from some quite narrow geopolitical interests, Taiwan and the United States didn't share very much in common. Taiwan was still under martial law. Opposition parties were banned. There was no freedom of the press. But gradually, even as our official relationship ended, what brought our unofficial relationship closer together is that we started to share more and more things in common. I'm talking about values. So both the Taiwanese and American people started being able to relate to each other on the basis of freedom, democracy, and respect for human rights. And I think these are the very values that underpin the robust and far-reaching relationship we enjoy today. And this relationship has been alluded to by the other distinguished panelists here. So I think it's important as firm and reliable partners for us to stay true to those beliefs and these values here in 2019 and beyond. So it also means that Taiwan must be ready to contribute to the causes that matter most to the American people, just as the American people have continued to support Taiwan. We are working closely on issues ranging from the anti-ISIL coalition to advancing religious freedom and supporting humanitarian efforts in the Middle East. We're also cooperating to enforce tough UN sanctions. We're coordinating on issues of transnational crime and combating disinformation. We're doing more than we ever have in the past. And I think in 2019, you can expect all of this to only increase and our work to only grow more and more close. And so we, and by we I mean Taiwan, the United States, and other like-minded countries, we're also joining efforts to ensure that the Indo-Pacific region remains free and open. Our own free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which Foreign Minister Joseph Wu has put a lot of thought into, seeks to strengthen democratic institutions, collective security, and commercial linkages across the region, and that closely take advantage of new economic opportunities both here in America and across the world. So last year, with the help of Rupert and US-TBC, we saw a number of large investment cases, I think, going in both directions across the Pacific Ocean. And we had major American technology and innovative firms set up new bases in Taiwan. And we also had a number of Taiwanese companies, including Formosa Plastics, CPC, Datsun, Stainless, Pipe, just to name a few, make large investments into the United States. So with the Trump administration's focus on creating jobs and new economic opportunities, I'm positive that these efforts will only continue over this coming year. So I want to summarize these main points by emphasizing that, as Russell and as others have pointed out, 2019 will be a big year. We fully expect to see many changes in the geostrategic landscape, from the fallout of the trade war to Taiwan's own domestic politics as we enter election campaign. But one thing won't change, and that is Taiwan's commitment to be, as I keep saying, a firm and reliable partner for the international community. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Vincent, for that. And so right now we'll begin with a moderated discussion. Dave, I want to start off with you, since you sort of set the tone in terms of many of the follow-on assessments that 2019, in your view, is going to be relatively stable, and you made a caveat 2019. Now, I know that the message of compatriots, Taiwan Compatriots, was sort of how Xi Jinping was intending to set the tone for 2019. But even before that, he's also made. I want you to address that specific, sort of speech. But thinking longer term, there's perhaps a more significant speech that he made during the 19th Party Congress, where it was much longer term, looking at the Chinese dream and how the unification of Taiwan was sort of integral to that goal. And so I think perhaps you can give us maybe your assessment of the implication for U.S. policy of Xi Jinping's message to compatriots, but longer term, what's the long-term sort of assessments? And I know you have some comments that you want to make about PRC coercion too as well, so if you can weave that in, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Russell. Xi's speech was quite interesting. A couple of things I might say about it. One, you had to make this speech. This is something you have to do on the 40th anniversary. And I think one of his important audiences was a domestic one within China, because there's a certain amount of skepticism in China that CCP policy towards Taiwan is in fact effective. There's a perception that Taiwan is drifting apart and that Xi policies are not effective in blocking that. So he had to make a speech, and he had to address that aspect of it. One of the things he did to address that aspect was to be rather hardline. He's hardline in the sense that he once again peddled one country, two systems, which he got the exact kind of reaction that anyone would have told him. But nevertheless, he's going to go ahead and do it. I.e., I'm telling my own people that we're going to shove it down Taiwan's throat. He then reinterprets the 1997 census in a way that's consistent with his long-term desire to have reunification accomplished. He there's one action element in his speech. It's the point where he's talking about we need to work out a two-systems framework suitable for Taiwan. He's not willing to talk about one China. It's the one China principle. That's what Taiwan's going to have to accept. But we will talk about two systems. However, when we talk about two systems, you have to understand, in his words, that the premise is that China's sovereignty and security is the most important thing that has to underline it. What I draw from this is that over the long term, he's calling on every element in the Chinese party state system to up the pressure on Taiwan. I don't think there's anything particularly new about the United States. It's just the standard language that this is an internal Chinese affair, which will work no interference. I didn't see a particular message for the United States. However, the fact that, as I read it, he wants a sort of all-of-state party system pressure on Taiwan over the long term does present a challenge for the United States. It means we are going to have to respond to it. And responding to it has two problems. So let me just mention one of them. One of them is that the more pressure that's put on Taiwan, the more response there's going to be in the United States. And I think you yourself made reference to some of the comments that have been made recently by members of the House. Ed Yoho's article in the Taipei Times, and having a member's block about the other fellow, Steve Chabot, calling for a reassessment of the relationship. In other words, what China is doing by putting more pressure on Taiwan is getting a response in the United States, which is raising a question about whether the United States should adhere to one China. Over the long term, that's a very dangerous thing for China to be doing from its own interest, because it does not want the United States to abandon the one nuclear policy. Now, to go to my points on Taiwan, PRC pressure on Taiwan, which I'm getting an old man, I forget to do things when I have the oath in front of me. But I think that's an interesting question for what's going to happen in 2019. On the one hand, one of the elements of PRC pressure has been restraint on tourism and agricultural purchases. Now they've got a bunch of new KMT mayors and magistrates who want to promote this. So it's highly possible, as a result of dealings with them, that tourism is going to go up. And that pressure will go down to a certain extent. You mentioned something which I think is very interesting, that there was a pause in the exercises around Taiwan in the run-up to the local elections, about 6 months before they started that. But what is PRC interest in 2019? To have a lot of these exercises or to have less of them? I don't think I know the answer to that. I think you're absolutely right that they control that and tune it in the way they want. Certainly there will pressure be on Taiwan's international space. Taipei will not be going to the WHA in May this year. I'm absolutely sure of that. What about allies? Is it in China's interest this year to peel away more of Taiwan's allies or not? I don't know the answer to that. And finally, I bring up the East Asia Youth Games, which were to have been scheduled in Taichung, canceled because the DPP had the temerity to allow a referendum on participation in the Olympics to go forward. That referendum was turned down. We now have a KMT mayor in Taichung who wants to put these games back on the ice. Can we get them back? Will they happen in 19? Could they be scheduled in 2020? think there are a lot of interesting things in terms of PRC dealing with Taiwan that we'll have to watch. I apologize.
No, that's great, Dave. Phil, moving to you, an issue that continually resurfaced in public debate here in Washington in recent years is the question of the imminence of the PLA threat to Taiwan. And I think just by fortuitously, the DIA just released the 2019 China Military Power Report, and parts of it addressed PLA's growing capabilities. I do think it's important to point out that nowhere in the report did the DIA assess that the Chinese military was ready to take military action. But it does address that there is a concern that over time the PLA may get to a point where they would. So Phil, I mean, I want to get your assessment on what you think is the PLA's readiness, to take military action against Taiwan. I also think this is important because we need to sort of assess the possibilities of preparing for conflict now, tomorrow, 5 years from now, maybe 15 years. I mean, what's your take?
Okay. Well, in the short term, they're still absorbing the results of this reorganization and figuring out how the parts work together. And so I would say in the short term, there's a decreased ability to execute a major operation. I mean, this really is a big deal. It's all the, how I put it in the book, is virtually every part of the PLA has either had its mission changed or it now reports to somebody else or has to work with somebody else that it didn't work with before. And that's a profound organizational culture change, and it just takes time to figure out what those new relationships are and how to work together. A key piece of that is the personnel side, that you now have a joint structure, command and control structure, but nobody who has training on how to work within that structure. So it takes time to figure that out. That's part of the focuses of their exercises and training, training staff officers so they know what they're supposed to do in the event of a major operation or conflict. And that, it just takes time to figure that out. So in the short term, there's a dip. But as I said, over the longer term, this, I think, is an organizational structure that's much more workable than what they had before, and that'll improve their ability to project power. And that's, I think, the issue kind of looking forward. And what can Taiwan do to complicate that task for the PLA? What can the United States do to complicate that task for the PLA? And that's one thing that is, David alluded to, the changes in US-China relations. Our national strategy documents take the PRC as a competitor. And that manifests itself within the Department of Defense of thinking, how do we prevail in that competition? What do we need? What capabilities do we need? What concepts do we need? What training do we need? How do we need to be working and operating differently with a focus on China? That parts of that have existed in the US system, but that's a qualitatively different thing. So you have the US that is not going to be standing still in terms of its capabilities. That's something that will complicate the PLA task. And in any case, to do either a blockade and sustain that to a point of decision, or an amphibious invasion, which is one of the most complicated military operations you could ever perform, those are very, very challenging military tasks. As I think about the long term, what worries me a little, I've been doing some work on the 95-96 crisis and looking at how the United States and Taiwan assessed what was going on. And one of my conclusions is it was pretty easy because the PRC PLA capabilities were so limited. You know, there were certain things they could do, there were a lot of things they couldn't do, and that made it easier to give the leadership a clear picture of what was going on. Today, we have a PLA that's a lot more capable, that has a lot more options. If we go out 5 or 10 years, their ability to put all that together and execute it is going to improve significantly. And that is a big analytic challenge because it's no longer an issue, do they or don't they have the capability to pull this off? It's will they or won't they? You know, is the leadership willing to pay the costs and run those risks? And that's not a question of capabilities, it's a question of intent, which is a lot harder to judge. So that's one of my concerns going forward as the capabilities increase And again, I come back to, what can Taiwan do to better position itself? What does the United States need to do to better position itself?
Great. Rupert, you're full of great ideas, and I think, and so I would like to sort of open it up a little bit for you in terms of my question for you. And I know you sort of heard, all the the prior assessments about, the sort of the pressure campaign, the military, challenges that Taiwan faces, the longer term threat. And so looking holistically beyond just the economic factors that I've asked you to talk about in the opening statement, what are options? What are U.S. options here in terms of addressing the longer term challenges that Taiwan faces? How do you see this sort of playing out?
How do I see it playing out? Well, one thing I quickly wanted to pick up on was something that Phil just said about a blockade. Think about a blockade scenario for a quick second here. When you think about, for those of you who study this or take an interest in it or just read a piece in the paper from time to time, supply chains are integrated and fully globally. I mean, that's a big part of what we're doing right now with trade confrontation between the US and China. If you sever the supply chain, companies do not keep 6 months of back supplies in a warehouse out back. That's not how it works. Everything is timed for delivery so that you keep 1, 2, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days of stuff, and it's going in, and it's being made, and it's going out, and that's how it flows. You sever the supply chain, and things are going to come to a grinding halt very quickly, which makes a blockade of Taiwan, if you just looked at it through the prism of the semiconductor industry, a significant national security issue for the United States, almost immediately. Significant industries in our economy would almost immediately stop because they couldn't get access to the chips that they need. That, I guarantee you, will focus minds. So anyway, I just on Russell's point, the United States has a direct interest in my view, in a number of things as they relate to Taiwan. Vincent pointed out something that I'm sure we'll hear a lot from him in his new position, which is the importance of Taiwan's democratic, market-based economy, what the people have done with their democracy and with their economy. It is a poster child for what the United States has argued for in a post-World War II environment globally. Taiwan has achieved it. What are we prepared to do to continue to support that as a vision moving forward? Or are we to decide, you know what, maybe we'll just pull back to the midline and let the Chinese get on with it? And what message does that then send to our alliance partners and our friends in the region or around the world about the importance that we place on freedom, democracy, democratic institutions, market-based economies? So Taiwan's importance has shifted for us, in my view, dramatically. Continues to, but I'm certainly away from, I think, when the TRA was written. It has taken on a different significance for the US. There's the military side as well. I defer to Phil and others who have a good grasp of that. We can talk parochially about arms sales to Taiwan and those sorts of things that maybe the council plays in a wee bit. But on the economic front, to assure or to ensure that Taiwan has the maximum ability to pursue self-determination, and I understand that that is a weighted term broadly when we talk about Taiwan, but for the people to feel as if their hard work, that their economic opportunities are mostly in their own control, requires Taiwan to be able to participate in the economic scenery, if you will, globally right now. And that is bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. And at the moment, Taiwan is outside looking in. So how does that change? Well, in my view, the only way that changes is with US leadership. Why is it in our interest? Well, our manufacturers and our service providers benefit parochially, but more broadly, we have a strategic interest in Taiwan's economic health and well-being. So to me, that's sort of the overarching case right now for an economic imperative that comes out of our own parochial need to push through a strategy on pork and beef. How that plays out in 2019, Russell, as I noted, I'm not hugely optimistic. I think that for us as a country to do big things with Taiwan will require the attention of our senior leadership. And I'm not going to have some witty zinger for you all about what everybody thinks about on the present situation at the moment. We do have people who know Taiwan well. Bolton, Pompeo, and others, Randy over at DOD. There are people over there who really know Taiwan, who have experience with it legislatively. They've visited many times, written about it often, spoken about it. They have the capacity to advise the president on these matters. Whether he will or will not listen to their counsel, I can't tell you. I don't think anybody in this room can. And again, I'm not going to hit you with some witty zinger. I think I don't think it matters who's president. It matters in the moment what the opportunity is and how we calibrate it with all the other issues that we've got on the board. But there is an opportunity this year to do more with Taiwan, to do big things with Taiwan, if this administration would like to.
Vincent, moving over to you, I think it's clear to all of us here in Washington that that China's pressure on Taiwan is increasing. Right, it's diplomatic, it's military, it's economic, it's really full spectrum. And so that's observation that we can see from here, from Washington. I want to get your sense in terms of what you see as your most pressing concerns for 2019, and just so that we're not sort of all focused on the challenges and the gloomy aspects of 2019. Maybe you can share some of your hopes for 2019 also as well.
Thank you, Russell. Well, it's always good to start with hope. So, anyways, I do hope that, and I actually have every confidence that Taiwan-U.S. relations will continue to go stronger in year ahead. And I don't mean this just abstractly, but I mean that, as our president has pointed out in the past, we will be able to see some momentum on substantive issues like enhanced economic ties, on the same vein which Rupert just spoke about earlier. Closer cooperation on regional and global issues, a continuation and enhancement of what we've been doing already, and more in-depth discussions about how we can defend Taiwan's freedom and democracy from the challenges that we in fact have in common. So I think we're making good progress on that, and I think that our work with the Trump administration has continued to be very good. It's continued to be robust, and we see eye to eye on almost every single issue. And I think that's a rarity, actually, in international politics, especially today. And I think that we're able to have frank discussions about, our common challenges, our common opportunities with the Trump administration. So I think that this is a good relationship, and we have a lot to look forward to. Now, more broadly around the world, I think we do need to have more recognition of the challenges Taiwan faces in maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, which is, just not just in Taiwan's interest, but in the international communities as well. And I think it's a tough campaign. It's a tough job. And I think it's even harder because of the stark current differences in the political systems across the Taiwan Strait. So I think that Taiwan's efforts and the president's her efforts should be commended and should be encouraged. And I think that the international community has a role to play by showing not just the moral, but also substantive support for Taiwan in a number of areas to show that, hey, Taiwan doesn't stand alone in a community of like-minded states. So as for challenges, I've highlighted some of our views on international relations already, and I think that people generally believe that our President Tsai, has a good track record on cross-strait international relations. So I think the main challenge will be actually going into the general elections in Taiwan. So I want to bring this kind of domestically, and we're an open and free democracy, and what has this has made us strong, but has also made us, I think, along with many democracies around the world, more susceptible to deliberate foreign influence campaigns designed to discredit our democratic institutions and guide our society. So, as many of our government officials have pointed out in Taipei, there's a real concern that the Chinese have become very good at this, very good at foreign influence campaigns. So we need to watch out, and I think we need to work with other like-minded countries even more closely. Many of which faced similar challenges, and so we need to strengthen our democracy so that we can be on guard for such actions, and we need to strengthen our work with the United States and other democracies with whom we face common challenges. Thank you.
Well, we're going to open up to audience Q&A. So please, when you wait for the microphone, also state your name as well as your affiliation,
and also try to limit yourself to to questions and not long comments. Let's take these 3 questions in this row actually. We'll take them in a group and then we'll do a chance for the panelists to respond. Okay, so Joe, and then David, and Dr. Wen.
Joe Bosco, formerly with DOD. Phil, it's great to see you again. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. You described what also DIA has described as incredible leaps and bounds progress in Chinese military capabilities. I wonder if you could estimate for us what the causes of that progress have been. Was it strictly organic, a normal development within the PLA? Was it an emulation of U.S. capabilities? Or did our mill-to-mill program have something to do with it? Were they constantly advising China on how they should improve their capabilities? I can recall being with another unnamed think tank about a decade or so ago when it was described as necessary to improve PLA's professionalism. And then there was an emphasis on jointness. We needed to develop those capabilities. And as far as amphibious capabilities, there was a joke. Well, China's capability for amphibious invasion consisted of a 1,000,000-man swim. People don't joke about that anymore. I wonder if you could tell us how much we've contributed, however well-intentioned, to making China the military superpower it is. And if we have, will that affect changing our policy going forward in terms of global relations?
All right, Dave Keegan, retired State Department, now at Johns Hopkins SAIS. We've talked a lot about all the government on every side, but I wonder if coming out of the 91 elections that we saw at the end of last year, what do you think the point of view is of the people in Taiwan? What are the electorate concerned about? What are the issues they're focused on? And have we gotten any different perspective on that from the elections?
I'm KF Lin. I'm one of the co-founders of GTI. I have 2 questions to the 4 speakers here. The first question is that we have Taiwan Travel Act passed last year in the Congress. And then my question is there some chance this can be actually implemented this year so that President Tsai Ing-wen or her senior official can visit Washington, D.C., either invited by the Congress or the White House or whatever organization. And do you think this will help her campaign in 2020? The second question is that President Trump called Tsai Ing-wen in 2016. She called her the President of Taiwan, right? And all the acts passed by U.S., TTA, TIA, all use the name of Taiwan. Do you think there is any problem if Taiwan internally reform or call itself the Republic of China? But the Republic of China died in 1949, and it was kicked out of United Nations in 1972 or something. And the U.S. cut the formal relationship with the Republic of China in 1979. So my question is this: do you think is there any problem if Taiwan just call it by the name of Taiwan rather than Republic of China or Republic of China Taiwan? That's my 2 questions. And would that help to further the relationship between the people of Taiwan, or you call the people of Taiwan, with the people of the United States? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wen. So we have 4 questions that picked up on there. So causes of PLA's capability, they'll directly address the bill. The view of Dave Keegan's question about the view of the people of Taiwan. I think Vincent, perhaps you'd be the best person to address that among us. Then we have the question about the implementation of the Taiwan Travel Act, and also the name of Taiwan and how that would affect US-Taiwan relations. Perhaps David can
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So, but we'll go the order.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Sure. This is part of research we're doing right now on how the PLA learns to do new things, either things that other militaries do or genuinely do things in terms of innovating. And it's a surprisingly complicated question. It is certainly true that they look at foreign models exhaustively. They are voracious consumers of the open source literature on militaries. They have an organization that's specifically set up to get all that stuff and translate all of it. They have looked to US models as an inspiration. They've looked to Western models more generally. They have looked to the Russian model for some things. And I think as we look at their military exercises with Russia, which are taking on more of a combat character and more interoperability, they're explicit that they want to learn from the Russians on that. Certainly they've gotten things from intelligence collection that go into modernization. But you asked specifically about the military-to-military programs. And so I've been kind of involved in this officially since about 2004, so that's the period of my exposure. I think before then, there's some instances where they got exposure to things from mil-to-mil training, like opposition, confrontation exercises. And that did have an impact in them deciding that that was an important mechanism and something that they wanted to have. And I think they knew about it from the literature. They got exposure to it from mill to mill, and that probably pushed them in the direction of pursuing that. My own experience in doing mill to mill since 2004, which is post FY 2000 Defense Authorization Act restrictions, is I think OSD has worked pretty hard to limit what the PLA sees and to try to focus that on things that we feel have value for the United States and won't give them undue advantages. So we're not interested in helping them build an NCO core. We're not interested in helping them learn how to do joint operations better. And I haven't seen mill-to-mill that is focused on those things. In fact, I think what I would say from my own experience is that the perceived value of it has narrowed and diminished. And it is focused, I think, on messaging, being able to talk directly with the PLA and tell them what we are concerned about and talk to them and hear what they are concerned about. So to have that messaging channel, it has focused on crisis management and building capabilities, including through things like a secure video link and the joint staff dialogue mechanisms, to have a better understanding of how we would each interact in a crisis and to be able to manage that better, and broadly knowledge about the PLA. What do they think? How do they operate? And there's a tension there because, in my own lane, which is the military education lane, in writing this book, we learned a lot from our interactions with the PLA. What were they worried about? What problems were they thinking? What things were real issues? And I know from our mill-to-mill contacts, which focus mainly on security strategy things and on education, we found out a lot about what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, what are the obstacles, and at least for me, that's made it possible to have a better assessment. But when we do one of those engagements, we're crystal clear from the start. Our goal is to learn more and understand. Our goal is not to provide them answers or help them find their way to greater effectiveness. So I can't speak authoritatively to what happened before, but since I've been involved in the process personally since about 2004, there has been a consistent effort to think through that. What are we telling them? What are we learning? Is Is it helping us? Is it hurting us? And in those areas that you were talking about, like joint operations, we try to be very careful not to help. And that's a source of frustration for them, that they would like to do traditional security exercises with the U.S. military, because the U.S. military is the best, and they know we're not willing to do it, so they're turning to the Russians, or they're turning to militaries that the U.S. has trained, because they're not getting it from us.
Is it? Sure.
Let me try to answer, I think, three of these questions. The first one on the Taiwan Travel Act. The Taiwan Travel Act doesn't actually make any legally enforceable demands on what the administration can or cannot do. And certainly it helps make a strong case for it, but it doesn't make those enforceable demands. So in the end, this is a decision that the administration is going to have to consciously take. And so the most important work for us then, therefore, is to strengthen our relationship with this administration. And as to whether this helps benefit the election, well, I think it benefits the country. It's the Taiwan Travel Act. It doesn't benefit a single person. It benefits a whole class of people, Taiwan's political leadership. So it's going to benefit the country, I think, more than any specific candidate. The second part on can Taiwan call itself Taiwan, not the PRC, well, not the ROC. Well, Taiwan is a democracy, and this is something that the people of Taiwan support. I'm sure it's going to be reflected in our electoral process. And on the final part about whether such an action will, benefit Taiwan's relationship with the United States. So my own personal view is that the United States and other like-minded countries around the world respects the efforts that this administration, that Taiwan has taken to maintain the cross-strait status quo and to avoid surprises in this regional situation. So I think that this president does have a proven record in maintaining that, and I'm sure she'll continue to do so.
Vincent, perhaps you want the question with regards to Dave's question about so what are the issues that the people of Taiwan are sort of most concerned about that are going to sort of shape the race up to the 2020 elections? Do you have sort of any insights on what you think, perhaps your assessment of what happened in 2019 and going in to 2020?
Well, I mean, 2019 was a local election, and the elections, well, 2018 was a local election, and 2020 will be a national election. So the issues that that the candidates and parties will face will be far different. And I think that was reflected, I think, in the election campaign itself, when during the 2018 elections, it was decided very much on local issues, and whereas in 2020, there's going to be a much more stringent test of candidates, their worldviews, their ability to manage their relationships with different countries and so forth. So I do think that the Taiwanese people will be looking for that in 2020.
Yeah, I think that, okay.
I'd like to address President Min's questions. Go back and make sure first on the Taiwan Travel Act and President Tsai. My expectation is that President Tsai will make another transit of the United States issue, that she'll find a way to do that. It will probably be important in part for her campaign, but also for solidifying your diplomatic allies. And when she comes, I expect she'll be treated very courteously because of the good track record that we have in working with her. I think it would be entirely unrealistic to think that she would be visiting Washington. I do think that under the administration policy, which I agree with Vincent, it's EPA is not binding, it's administration policy. They've been reasonably flexible recently. We've had cabinet ministers, a couple of them visit within the last year. Speaker Su quietly came, met with Speaker Ryan at John McCain's funeral. I think the administration is going to be flexible in the way they administer it. On the name of the ROC, I entirely agree with what Vincent said. This is a matter for people of Taiwan to decide whether they want to change the name of their country. they've been thinking about this for a long time, and they have a record of being very pragmatic and to thinking pragmatically about how other countries, including the United States, might react to that. But it's really up to the people of Taiwan to decide how to do that. I've been interested to see in the last year how President Tsai has addressed that issue. She's interested in building consensus within Taiwan society. That's one of the things. And so when the diplomatic allies were stolen away, and I can't remember exactly which ones it were, she was saying that there is a consensus in this country to defend the sovereignty of the Republic of China. And she said it more recently as part of her 4 points, that defending the sovereignty of Taiwan, the Republic of China, is important. And I think we ought to value what she's trying to do there by building consensus within Taiwan society on how to deal with these very sensitive issues.
Just quickly, so I actually think I understand the good intentions that you're pressing in respect to President Tsai traveling to DC, but I absolutely agree with Dave. It would actually be counterproductive in my view. It would hurt rather than help. Walter Lohman, some of you know, is a really good guy. He writes a column in the Taipei Times from time to time. Let me just quote what Walter wrote last week. Tsai Ing-wen has been an eminently responsible steward of the relationship with Washington. This, in turn, has given friends in Washington the room they need to press Taiwan's cause. To push for something like that negatively impacts the point that Walter is making, and it actually restricts the ability of Taiwan's friends in DC to do things that are for the relationship. It doesn't help.
Take a few questions over here from Chia, Janice, and Jonah.
Hi, I'm Chia Chang with United Dailies Group Taiwan. Questions for Vincent. First one, can you respond to Dr. Brown and Rupert's comment on President Tsai's visit? Would it be unrealistic for her to visit Washington, D.C.? Would it be counterproductive? Second question is, China asked Nike and Apple, all these U.S. firms, to change how they indicate Taiwan on their website. Since you're in D.C., would you urge U.S. officials to ask their firms not to do so? Thank you.
Janice?
Yeah, I'm Janice with the DPP office here. Question for David. You were explaining a little bit earlier why you thought Xi Jinping formulated his 40th anniversary speech the way he did, which I thought was really helpful, because one thing we're trying to figure out is why strategically he would have thought that putting the one country, two systems formula back on the table would be helpful, because in Taiwan it actually kind of galvanized public opinions and really forged the Taiwan consensus that we are trying to put together. But the other part of that is that it really narrows the space for the KMT, which is still Beijing's kind of preferred negotiating partner, and how they articulate their cross-strait stance. So we still have the Gauchma mayor saying that he absolutely supports 92 consensus, even though a lot of polls in the recent days have shown either a lot of confusion about it or just flat out Republicans who don't support it. And then we have President Ma, Wu Zhenyi, who is a former vice president, saying that they are eager to visit China soon after the 3-year ban on air travel expires. How do you see the KMT kind of walking around this balance, no matter who the candidate is?
Thank you. John Zhang with CPI TV of Taiwan. I have a question for Vincent. This is the first time to ask him. You are new in town. I would like to ask you what's your personal goal, objective for 2019? What kind of out-of-the-box new thinking you think that you are bringing to your job? And I have to speak it like it is. Is the current controversy surrounding your appointment having any impact? Is it distracting you from your job performance?
With all due respect, John, I thank you for your questions, but we'd like to avoid personal questions with regards to his, but with regards to objectives and goals for 2019, we'll address that. Okay.
All right. So, panels. Vincent, perhaps? Go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity to interact with all of you, and as you point out, I am new, so I do look forward to meeting with you and speaking with you on a more regular basis. I think the first question about from our friend from the UDN, I think this is very much a hypothetical question. It's actually difficult, I think, for any of us to answer, to speculate. But what I do want to emphasize is that I think this administration has shown they have a track record of being pragmatic, and I don't know why that would change for the future. The second part, of course, I think from a legal and political standpoint, even from a legibility standpoint, it is absolutely imperative for international firms to use a correct terminology for Taiwan. So this is something that we will continue to press for. Sorry, I'm monopolizing the answers. I'm really sorry about that. Just quickly to the gentleman from CPI. I'm not going to go into the personal issues, but I do want to say that my personal objective is less important than what is our country's objective and what is TECRO's objective here. And I hope that I can be an asset and I can help support TECRO's objective, which is, of course, to strengthen this relationship we have with the United States. Thank you.
Okay. Janice's question about whether Xi's speech, in fact, narrows the room for the KMT to define what they mean by the 92 consensus. Yes, that's what Beijing is saying. In a way, it's almost like saying, we don't care what you say. In the end, you're going to have to accept our interpretation of the 1992 consensus, which is basically the one China principle. Now, you're right, there is a debate going on within the KMT on how to frame their policy, with Mine Zhou on one side wanting to move away from his three points to say that reunification is not an objectionable goal for the KMT party, and various mayors stating things in slightly different ways. And I think the party understanding that they can't have 15 different views, they're going to have to come to a consensus on what it is. But Beijing is definitely sending a message that we do not like respective interpretations. We tolerated it in the past. It's not welcome now, and in the future it will be totally impossible. That's their message to the KMT. Now, the KMT then has to decide how they're going to define their position. And one thing also that's sure is that given the way Han Kuo-yu won using this issue to a certain extent in Kaohsiung, that the 92 consensus is going to be a central part of the debate in this campaign that's coming up. Not the only part, but one part of it. I think that's pretty much guaranteed by the way the year has gotten started.
Can I weigh in on the other part of that, which is the one country, two systems part? I think it's a conservative formulation. It's a safe one for Xi Jinping, even though it doesn't have much appeal in Taiwan. But the subtlety there about thinking about what the two systems part of it might mean is it's a way of starting to talk about unification and bypassing all the vetoers, right? Because Mine Zhou didn't want to have those political conversations, and he managed the cross-strait relationship, and he never got to the point where you could have that political talk, which was not an accident. Tsai Ing-wen doesn't want to have that political conversation. But this is a way you can have that conversation on the mainland, and Taiwan can't stop mainland scholars and analysts from thinking about how to elaborate what two systems might look like. And you can use United Front tactics to reach out to people in Taiwan in various forms to start to have some of that conversation, which touches on political things, which is Beijing's ultimate agenda to make that happen. So I think it's that's another aspect of that, not necessarily expecting party leadership to buy into it, but the possibility of having academic and Track 2 and United Front conversations about that, which is the conversation Beijing ultimately wants to have. So I think that's worth paying attention to.
One has to wonder who are going to be the interlocutors who are going to be willing
to
talk on this narrow topic of the two systems aspect of an unpopular proposal.
I didn't say it was going to work.
Premised on the fact that you got to accept our interpretation of one China.
I didn't say it was going to work, David. I'm saying, but that's an aspect of what Beijing's trying to do.
Just quickly on the Apple, Google, I saw that today too. Yeah. Also from the U.S. business community side, we remain in direct, ongoing contact with the U.S. government over this issue. We see it as extremely important and of the highest importance. It is an ongoing narrative with the U.S. government about how to handle this, how to cancel our own companies, even go further than that in ensuring that U.S. companies follow U.S. guidelines, not guidelines set by Beijing on how U.S. companies should conduct themselves globally.
Well, thank you all very much. We ran out of time, unfortunately. So please join me in thanking our excellent group of panelists.